And so to make a long story more compact, leading up to becoming an atheist, I had a very different childhood. So I was in forced labor growing up. From age 4 up, I was brought into the workforce, at first into construction and then the tree work. And so we would work from the moment waking up until going to bed, unless there was a full moon, and we worked through the entire night. I think at age 9 or 10, I worked for about 48 hours straight with no sleep. Not the most fun or exciting thing. My parents divorced, and then my dad moved to a property in Michigan where we didn't have any electricity or running water. Well, we sort of had running water. It was me running to the lake with buckets of water to bring them back and heat them up on the stove so we could shower. And then if our stove ran out of firewood, we'd have to wake up at 2 in the morning and cut down a tree and make the firewood and go from there. So it was a lot of chaotic moments there. And not just being in a rough time, but there was just no joy in the home. There was nothing to look forward to except for sleep. And so with that experience growing up, I began to have some questions. Well, if God exists, then why is life so terrible, right? Why does it seem like there's nothing worth living for? If God is good, then why did these things happen? And as time went on, I began to ask people those questions. I began to ask, well, why do anyone believe in the Bible? Why is the Bible trustworthy? And the answer that I got at the time was because it's the Bible. And that just wasn't good enough of an answer. I'd ask, why do you believe in God? And they would say, because it's God. And God has a reason for everything, and their lives are falling apart. And it wasn't a good enough answer. And so at the time, I began studying concepts behind quantum physics and evolution and a lot of these things, which at the time seemed more truthful, Thankfully, God never gives up on us, amen? He never stops working to reach us. And so that was just where I was at. And if people, they would hear my name and they would ask, oh, are you a Christian? I would respond in ways that I won't say today. I was very hostile to Christians. And never in a million years would imagine that I would be pastoring, that's for sure. God is good. And so I began to meet some young adults who I could tell they had a peace in their life that I'd never seen. I could tell they had some more reasoning behind what they believed. And so I was curious. I had kind of thought, well, I hope this is real, but I don't believe intellectually it is. And so I started Bible studies with the purpose of disproving it, hoping there was something more. And as we started studying with topics of why does evil exist? Why does God allow certain things? Going through prophecies to see the incredible, outline of what God has given to us to know that we don't have to have a blind faith, but that the Bible is trustworthy. So many of these topics have began to change my life, one topic at a time, began to transform me. At the same time I was getting Bible studies, I was a professional tree climber at the time. My dad has a family tree service, and so I would be up in the 100 foot up in the air with a rope and a chainsaw every day. Starting out afraid of heights, but I didn't have much of a choice, so it's what I did learn you can get over your fear of heights. It just takes a lot of repetition. Yeah. A lot of repetition. And so as we were very careful, very, very careful and safe. But when I started Bible studies, I should have died 3 times in a row. I got hit with 7,200 volts of electricity that caught the tree on fire and went through me, but it didn't do anything to me. The tree was just on fire in front of me, and I was a little bit in shock, but thankfully not the shock that the voltage should have brought. And about a month later, I was taking a dead tree out, a dead ash tree. I was about 75 foot up in the air, and I had to be anchored into a live tree. And I cut my rope. I never cut my rope since or before that. And thankfully I was able to re-lasso the tree before the tree broke. And I did not fall to my death, thankfully. And then about a month later again, I had a giant tree I was taking out, and I had a 400-pound log roll over me backwards because we had a new ground guy. So the back of my head nearly hit my heels. It folded me in half backwards, but nothing broke. And so the main thing was finally getting real answers from Scripture that I had never had before, to know that we don't have to have a blind faith, and then seeing God work directly in my life, that he actually did care, and that he was going to do everything that he could to reach me. And I was grateful for that.
So I think those are great points. I think one of the things that stood out to me that somebody said one time, and kind of you hinted at it, is that we're supposed to have a childish faith in the sense that we need to ask lots of questions. I've got little kids, and they ask lots of questions. Why? I need the reason behind that, Dad. You can't just tell me what to do. And really, it's not a sense of like a childish faith that I'm just going to believe it because you told me so. It's that we need to ask questions and have that reasoning behind it, which is really what the series is about. Is asking lots of questions. Today is just, why should I believe in a God? And I guess for you mentioned several different things, but for you, what was one of the big reasons that you believed that there was a true God?
Yeah, I think one of the main things was seeing that there's evidences in Scripture that outweigh everything else that I had seen. So now, those ideas of certain levels of evolution and stuff, I think it takes more faith sometimes to believe in some of those concepts. Then when you're looking at prophecy that outlines thousands of years with complete, perfect accuracy, today we just struggle to try to guess what the stock market's going to do or what a sports team is going to do or whatever the case is. So to predict a series of kingdoms rising and falling over thousands of years is not something that humans are capable of doing accurately. On top of that, not just giving evidence to Scripture, but also experiencing the God of Scripture working in and through my life and changing my life, to come from such a dismal place to actually being able to experience the joy that he wants us to experience in him.
Yeah, no, those are great. Well, we'll finish up, we'll have another Q&A kind of towards the end. We'll open up to the audience for questions after our topic as we cover it today. Thank you, Christian. And I did want to just touch base quickly. If you don't have the agenda for the rest of the series, again, it is Saturday and Tuesdays. So 10 o'clock will be the presentations, 9 o'clock is breakfast, like Real mentioned. And so the first day that we're going to be talking is why should I believe in God? The next time is can we trust the Bible? Is there evidence for Jesus? So we're going to be looking at things like archaeology, and we're going to be looking at some of the evidence of the writings that are behind it in the Bible and what evidences there are. And then on the 20th is there a problem with evil? Now, that might be a weird question, but in this day and age, we think of this kind of moral relativism where if it's okay for you, it's okay for me, or not okay for me, it doesn't matter what you believe. And so we actually are going to have a guest speaker that kind of help us out with that tonight. And he is a pastor that also used to be an atheist or agnostic and came to believe in God, and a great speaker, energetic. And then we also are going to talk about science. So Pastor Christian had mentioned, can we trust science? Can we trust this theory of evolution? Can we trust all the things that we're discussing? And then another kind of more philosophical and biblical question is like, what happens when we die? Am I good enough? This is something that a lot of people struggle with nowadays. And maybe you've come to terms with this and you've been thinking about it. And as I'm getting older, you start thinking more about what's going to happen after I die. And we want to really kind of dive into this in more detail, kind of exploring what are the arguments out there and what's really going to happen. And then, is there one truth? So a lot of people ask, is Christianity the only way, or does it matter what you believe? And so we're going to kind of go through each one of these, very similar to what Pastor Christian kind of helpfully convinced him to become a believer in God. And I think most of us, I think, have some faith in God, and this is really an opportunity to kind of hopefully strengthen that faith and actually have some reasons behind it. And really, it's this kind of classical view of philosophy and this philosophical arguments of reason. A lot of people think about philosophy as kind of like, these thought projections, like, well, how do I deal with this and how do I deal with morality? But actually, philosophy is really using reason. It's using evidence. It's using the things that we can see and experience as well. And so that's really what we want to do, is kind of look at the philosophy and have a reason for our faith. So with that, we'll jump into the series here. The first presentation is why should I believe in God? Now, this is probably a fairly basic question, but it's actually been on humans' minds for a very long time. There's this universal human quest for more. Is there more than what I perceive? Is there something to this universe? Like, why is it even here? Does belief resonate with me? Like, there's this deeper longing for ourselves. We kind of grapple with these profound questions. And it's been going on for millennia. And basically because there's this meaning-seeking nature. So humans are not merely thinking machines, but we want meaning to our thoughts. We desire justice, relationships. We can't just justify that what's around us is all that there is. I mean, even just thinking about nowadays, people that have millions or billions of dollars and they're not satisfied with their life. They're still looking for more. They have more than they can imagine. Most people say that once you reach that, like, I think it's around $100,000 mark is when all of your needs are met and then some of your wants. And this is really kind of showing that even people that have millions and billions of dollars still don't have that deeper meaning in their life. So C.S. Lewis, he's a famous author. He wrote, "If I find myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." Now, it's one of the first fill in the blanks, so if you're using your sheet, they're on every table, and there's some pens there as well. So really what C.S. Lewis is saying is that if we're not satisfied where we are now, then where there's something beyond where we are. So this belief in God, or the supernatural, is something that's actually very common in this day and age. So there's a few different studies I want to quote here. The Pew Research Center, this was just last year in 2025, it showed that 70% of people believed in life after death. 79% of people believed in something spiritual beyond nature. 86% of people actually believe that we have a soul or a spirit. And it just kind of shows that it just goes on and on that the majority of people think that there's something more than our physical nature. And same for another study that the Pew Research did, but really the first comment is that 83% of people believe that they have a spirit or soul or outside of their physical body or in addition to their physical body. And there's something spiritual beyond this natural world that we cannot see. And to me, I don't know about you, but I feel like in this day and age, I feel the pressure of people saying that materialism is the way to go, where everything is just the way it is just because. And there are people that are definitely pushing that agenda. But you can see that the vast majority of people actually still believe in something beyond the physical world. Even if you just look at people that go to mediums or card readers or fortune tellers, they're looking for something beyond. They're looking for the supernatural. So not just this kind of spiritual realm, but is there a God or not? So there's kind of three major kind of views behind this. One is that an atheist is somebody who is no God. And actually this is one of the largest, fastest growing religions of today. And it's the no believers, the people that actually don't believe in God, or even agnostic. And agnostics, there's kind of different views or different descriptions, but basically the thought of agnosticism is that you can't be sure if there is a God or not, or you don't care. Like you don't know. And so it's really kind of not saying that there is no God, but you're saying that I don't know if there's a God or not. And then there's actually, based on that study that we just showed, that 80-something% of people feel that there is a spirit or a spiritual soul, but they don't know if there's a God or not. So they're more agnostic. There was a good story about a gentleman who was going door to door inviting people to seminars like this. And he knocked on somebody's door and he said, "Hey, would you like to come to our church for a seminar?" And he said, "No, I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist." And he said, "Oh, well then you're sure that there is no God?" And he said, "Well, no, I'm not sure if I'm a God, if there is a God or not." "Oh, well then you're not an atheist, you're an agnostic because you don't know." And then he said to the gentleman, "Well, if you don't know if there's a God, would you want to know if there is a God?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I guess if there was a God, I'd want to know who he was." He said, "Well, great, we'll come to our church and I'll tell you if there is a God or not." Amazing, a few years later, he actually became a deacon in the church. So, and that's really kind of leads to the next point, is the theists. So I'm not saying Christian, I'm just theist. So theists believe that there is a God. And so there's many different theories out there and different religions that have different gods or God. And so these are kind of the three main, is that there is no God, I'm not sure if there's a God, and there is a God. So does it matter? I think it matters a lot. So there's Blaise Pascal. He was a 17th century philosopher and mathematician. And he used this kind of pragmatic approach to show the belief in God and what the potential outcomes were. This is not a proof for God, it's a wager. So if I said that God does not exist, but I believed in God, it's kind of a finite loss. So I spent some time coming to church, I had spent some time reading a book that didn't matter because God doesn't exist. So I wasted some time. So it's finite. However, if God doesn't exist and I don't believe, well, I didn't waste my time doing things that were around this God aspect. So it's a kind of a finite gain. I gained more time. I can be selfish. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm selfish or not, or if I lie or steal or cheat. I get what I want because it's all about me. So you get some finite gain. However, if you have this God who does exist and you don't believe in him, well, then you could potentially have this infinite loss. But if you do believe in him, you're going to have this infinite gain, this eternal life. So again, kind of going back to that story of the gentleman who knocked on the door, if you're agnostic and you're saying, well, I'm not sure if God exists or doesn't exist, and I'm not sure if I believe in him or I don't believe in him, well, there's some really big potential outcomes. And again, if God doesn't exist, okay, but what if he does? What if God does exist? We really have this opportunity to have an eternal life or eternal loss. So how can we know? How can we know if God is real or not? Now, when you think about the word know, there's a lot of different things, and you want to kind of put your trust into something. But I like to ask this question: what can you really know? So I'm going to ask these questions. Is the Earth's core molten? You know, it's this molten, like, magma. You know, that's what we get taught in school. Or the outer planets, there's Neptune out there, and the dwarf planet like Pluto. How about subatomic particles? Like, have you seen those, experienced them? Or even Antarctica. Has anybody here been into Antarctica? No, I know you haven't. There's always one person when I ask that question that does raise their hand. And today it was my daughter. And she hasn't been there yet. But I ask these questions because every single one of those, we're putting our trust in something or someone. So somebody did some studies and said, yeah, the Earth's core is molten. But nobody's ever drilled to the core of the Earth and said, yeah, that's for sure. And it definitely wasn't me. I didn't get to experience that. And same for planets and Neptune. Like, maybe you can use a telescope and you can look at Neptune. I have a telescope, but I can't even find Neptune with it. So I've never seen it. I've never seen it through a telescope. I can't, but I'm trusting other people. And nowadays, like, you can see these nice, like, pictures generated by AI and different things that you're not sure that if they're real or not. So again, you're trying to put your trust in something. You're trusting somebody else when they're telling you something. And same for all these things, like Antarctica. Like, what if somebody just made up this continent of Antarctica, and they said, oh, that's, even though it looks like a big ice, core on the bottom of the Earth, it's actually land. There's land underneath the ice. Well, I've never seen it. Like, again, you're trusting all the time. So I like to draw these circles to kind of show you a little bit about how much you actually know. So right now, and I'm not going to get too, like, metaphysical philosophy. We're here. Okay, we're in a building. You know that you're here, you're breathing, you're sitting next to the people here. So you know that. You know you got up this morning, you know what you did yesterday, maybe you know what you ate for breakfast if you had our good breakfast here today. Thank you again, Mason, for that. But the rest of what we know is actually you're putting a belief in somebody else. So as I go through this series and other presenters go through this series, you hopefully will believe us. But again, I'm presenting you evidence. All of this is evidence. I can never give you 100% absolute proof. But the same thing, I can't give you 100% absolute proof that the Earth is molten and the inside. I can't give you absolute proof that there's subatomic particles and how they work. Because I can't let you experience it in a way that you can say, I believe it without a doubt, without 100% certainty. So, a good example of that is, so I'm a physician, And one of the great stories that I like to tell is that in medical school, they made us read the New England Journal of Medicine. Now, it's one of the most prestigious journals in medicine. And the journal did this unique thing. They took two studies that were nearly identical. They were basically the same study, and nearly the same amount of patients in the study. And one study said this drug works, and the other study said this drug does not work. Now, what are you supposed to do with that information? I'm reading these studies, and I'm like, I can't see any differences between what they did. They use the same patient types, they use about the same number of patients, and I'm trying to analyze the data and look at it, but the outcomes were very different. Now in medicine, we actually have a 5% confidence interval, which means that 95% of the chance, it's a yes. So as long as you're within that statistical variance of 95%, then you're going to say, yes, this is a positive study. So I don't know how you feel now that you know that doctors are 5% wrong, but that's how we work in medicine. And so one of the studies was wrong. We don't know. And that's actually it leads to this idea of law of contradiction. So you can't have something, if I said there is a God and there is no God, you can't have both. And a lot of people think there's actually this Eastern religion thought that you have this and both idea. Well, there is no God and there is a God, and so you can have both at the same time. That doesn't work. You can't have both no God and a God. So there's this law of non-contradiction. So if I tell you something, and really the options are you can either accept it or you can reject it. So as we look at this idea of is there a God, you have to explore these ideas and look at the evidence, but you have to make the decision for yourself. So where can I find the evidence? Now, Christian did a very good job about talking about how the scriptures are very prominent and they have prophecies, and we're going to explore some of that later on. But I think there's this bigger general revelation that God has given us. And the first one is the universe. Now, I don't know if I can get anything bigger than the universe, so I wanted to start big and then come back to small. And now if we look at the universe, like what is the universe? It's the biggest thing we know of. It's all the planets, the solar systems, the galaxies. But more than that, it's all of matter. It's all of time. It's all of space, all of light. It's everything in the physical world that we know. So how does that prove that there's a God? So there's this idea, it's called the Kalam cosmological argument. So I told my kids I was going to use some big words today, so this is one of the bigger words. Cosmological. So if you know the cosmos, so we're going to study the universe a little bit. So this is a concise but profound logical framework for the understanding of the universe's origin. But then it also transcends the cause of the beginning of the universe, meaning that because there's a beginning of the universe, there is a God. So premise one, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Or another way to say it is like, when something has a beginning, there's a reason for it. And this premise two is that the universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe had a cause. Now, we're going to break this down a little bit more because I know this is kind of a deep thought. I forgot to warn you that we are going to go deep today. It's not going to be very superficial. And that's also why I gave you some handouts so you can study this a little bit more on your own. A great way to also study this, if you haven't been keeping up with the day and age, is AI. So if you like to kind of get into some more in-depth studies of this, get ChatGPT or Gemini or one of the new ones and just start asking them questions. Like, can you break this down a little bit for me? I tried to break it down for you today, but if you need to go back to it later, use those handouts to look up the terms and the words, and hopefully it'll help you a little bit more. So the first premise, I think, is important because it really kind of sets up the argument. So whatever begins to exist has a cause or an explanation. Now this is really based on what's called the principle of causality. So these mean that every event has an explanation. So I'm going to take an example. So we are here today. We were born because of our parents. We had a cause. This school was built because somebody had a cause. We wanted to have a school for kids. We wanted to have a gym to be able to play games and to have presentations. So everything kind of has a cause. Now, this is very kind of common sense if you think about it from day to day, that things that begin to exist have an explanation. And partly I say that because we don't accept things that just pop out of nowhere. We don't say that I'm here today, but I don't have any parents. I have 0 parents. Like I was just born in the middle of the street and I just popped out of nowhere. Or we didn't say like I didn't walk down the here and I say, oh, there's this building. It just popped out of nowhere. Like nobody built it. Like we all believe that when there's something that has a purpose, it's because that somebody had thought behind it. They had an explanation as to why it's built. So it's also this kind of philosophical support for science in general. Because everything that we're studying has a purpose. So I brought in that study that said that this medication is good for, let's say, hypertension or high blood pressure. Well, that medication has a cause. You know, somebody came up with this idea that said, I need this medication to treat this disease. Like there's a thought behind it. So whatever begins to exist has a cause or an explanation. So then the second premise is that the universe began to exist. So this is a bigger kind of concept that I think we need to delve into. So did the universe begin? And this is really kind of looking at more contemporary or modern science and cosmology that points that the universe had this beginning. Now, if you go back several hundred years ago, lots of people that didn't believe in God actually felt that the universe was eternal because they felt like something had to be eternal, partly because we're here. So that means that there's something has to be in the past for all eternity. But in cosmology, they started studying and looking, and with modern science, we found out that our universe actually had a beginning. And how do we know that? So here's a good example. So Edwin Hubble, who you're familiar with the Hubble telescope. The Hubble telescope has shown some amazing pictures of our universe. And it's gone deeper than almost everything. Now there's the new Webb telescope, which goes a little bit deeper. But you also probably know about the Doppler effect. So Edwin Hubble came and studied what's called the Doppler effect, but not of sound. And so if you're not familiar with Doppler effect, I'm going to give you a brief tutorial on this. And there's a graph for it. But we're going to pick a car. So if a car is driving towards you, it kind of has a higher pitched sound. And then as it drives away from you, it has a lower pitched sound. So here's my rendition of it. Like, okay? So that's how that works. So the Doppler effect, you've all heard it, experienced it. So the Doppler effect means that as something is speeding towards you, those sound waves get compressed. So that's why it sounds higher pitched. But then when it's moving away from you, those sound waves actually start to stretch out. So that's why it becomes a lower pitch. The same thing actually happens with light. So we don't think about studying light in that degree, but Edwin Hubble did. He said, I'm going to study all of the galaxies and stars that I can see, and I'm going to see if there's a shift. So if we're actually moving closer to each other, there's going to be a blue shift. If we're moving far away from each other, there's going to be a red shift. So what did he find? He found that there's a red shift. There's a red shift everywhere you look. So it doesn't matter which galaxy or star you point. It doesn't matter if you're on the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, eastern, western. Everything is moving away. Now, how can that be? It's really because this universe is expanding. So, as the universe is expanding, I want you to think, well, how can everything move away in all different directions? All right, take out your imaginary balloon, blow it up. Okay, if I put a dot on the balloon before I blew it up, and then I blew that balloon up, now every point on that balloon is now farther away from the point that I marked. If you can imagine that for a second. So basically our galaxy is blowing up like a balloon. Now, if you get into, again, more cosmology, it's not shaped like a balloon and it's not circular, but I'm not going to go into that stuff. We're just going to go with that it's expanding. You can ask your AI friend to explain what the shape of the universe is later. But the basic gist is that it's expanding. So how does that point to the beginning of the universe? Now, it's because we can go back in time. So again, if I had my little balloon and I blew it up, that means that earlier in time, it wasn't blown up, right? So it's the same thing with this, is that now our galaxies are getting farther and farther away. Our solar systems are going farther and farther away. And so if we go back in time, like millions and billions of years ago, then it would actually lead to what's called the singularity. Now, the singularity we'll talk about a little bit more. But as you can tell, there's this expansion effect. So again, if you go back in time, that means that things had to be closer. And we can extrapolate the distances of like how fast things are going apart. So then if you know how fast things are spreading apart, you can then use some calculations to figure out how long they've been apart and for how long. Okay, so we're going to rewind the clock. I know it's a little bit deep. Hopefully you get to my balloon analogy, but just again, go back in time. My second point around why the universe had a beginning, it's called the second law of thermodynamics. Now this gets quoted a lot as we study science because it's a law. We've never found anything that doesn't follow this law. So there's theories in science, and those are things that can probably be disproven or we don't have a way to absolutely prove it. But the second law of thermodynamics has always been consistent forever. So that's why it's a law. Now what does it say? It says in an isolated system, entropy, a measure of disorder or useless energy, increases with time. So that means that, another way to say this is that heat dissipates, okay? And then the other way is that everything becomes more disorderly. So a good example too would be if I had a bottle of perfume and I cracked it open and I set it on the table, eventually that perfume is going to get more disorderly. It's going to start spreading out. Everybody's going to start smelling it because it's going to become more disorderly. But eventually it's going to be so disorderly, it's going to spread out so thin that you're not going to be able to smell it anymore. That's actually the same thing with our heat. So our heat in our universe is, again, we're expanding, but as we expand, our universe gets colder because we're not close enough together. So just think about, as we all huddle together, you stay warmer, and as you separate, you get colder. So as the second law of thermodynamics, it actually leads to what's called heat death. So our universe is getting colder and colder. Our sun is going to burn out. Every sun is going to burn out if you went far enough into the future. So what does that mean? Well, that means that there's an end to the universe. So if you believe in pure materialism, which means that everything that is the way that it's going to be, then that means that eventually every sun is going to burn out. We're not going to have any light. We're not going to have any heat. Everything's going to die. It's kind of a scary thought. But if you think about the projections of this, is that that's what's going to end up happening. Because we don't know of anything that can create new suns. We don't know of anything that can create new heat. We don't know of anything that can do this on this massive scale like the universe. So how does this again point to the beginning of the universe? So there's a finite time of our universe. We can actually extrapolate when that heat death is going to happen. Because our sun is just like a gas tank. It's going to burn out. It's going to use up all of its energy at some point. So what if the universe was eternal? So what if we went eternally in the past? What if we went 160 trillion years ago? Then we wouldn't be here today. Because heat death would have already occurred. So again, you can have an eternal universe that's getting more and more disorderly and colder because you can't extrapolate that far back, if that makes sense. I know it's a little bit, again, a deep thing. But basically, because we're getting colder, you can't have an eternal universe before us because we would have already extinguished. So, little, again, sciencey facts. I like it. We can ask more about it. Sorry. So this kind of leads me, there's some other things too with the Big Bang, which I'm not going to go into, but you can look it up. But so Big Bang Theory is now, I mentioned that at the very beginning of the universe, there's this idea of a singularity. Now, if you actually read some textbooks, it says, what is the singularity? It says that it's nothing. It says that there was basically nothing, and the singularity was all of density, all of gravity, with no dimension, that was held into a little point, and then it exploded. Like, that's this theory. Now, I'm not saying I agree with the theory. I do agree that there was a beginning of the universe. I don't know if I necessarily agree with the Big Bang, but in the scientific thing, I do believe that God created the universe. And if it was out of a singularity or if he just made it happen, I don't know. Because I can't go back in time and see it. Again, we have to put our faith in something. But what is the singularity? I'm going to try to, again, I love analogies. So if I said, okay, I'm 3D, I'm three-dimensional. I've got a height, a width that's hopefully not getting bigger, depth, and then there's 2D. So if you took your paper and you drew, a box, that's got 2 dimensions, it's got a height and a width. And then if you're going to go to 1-dimensional, okay, you could draw a line, which technically a line still has a width, but you drew a line that you couldn't see the actual width of it, which you can't really do. But if you had a line that's like 1-dimensional, but then if you you shrunk it down into 0 dimensions. Again, it's this concept that you can't really get. But that's what the singularity is that there's 0 dimension, there's nothing to it. Now, most people think that, okay, well, that was all the mass of the universe. It's like all of the universe stuck every single bit of matter into this little tiny singularity and then it exploded. But that's not the case. The case of the Big Bang Theory is that this was all of gravity, all of time, all of space, all of matter. It was everything. It was condensed in this little singularity. So what was outside of that? We don't know. There's no way to know. So this means that the Big Bang took place in no space, no place, no time, no nothing. Like, how can that be explained? So how can that be explained? I don't know. So what was, and even that, like, lots of, this is mainstream, like, materialism thinking that the Big Bang happened. But then now they're trying to figure out, okay, well, what happened before the Big Bang? However, we can't really measure things that happened before matter, time, and space because we don't have a way to do that. Like, because we live in a world of matter, time, and space, and light, and so we don't have any way to measure anything before that. So what happened before this is, even in mainstream, like, science, they're looking for something supernatural. They don't like to say that, but that's really what it is. They're looking for something that's outside of matter, outside of this nature that we know. It's outside of everything. It's out of energy. It's outside of all of this. Because they're trying to say, how did this Big Bang happen? We don't know what was there. And there's lots of theories around it. But really, everything is outside of the nature that we know. Which is kind of going back to this cosmological argument. It's saying that whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, as we just talked about. Therefore, this universe has a cause. So, if the universe had a cause, and God is the cause of this, maybe, I haven't even really mentioned God, what if there is this deity or something outside of the natural world? Because there has to be something supernatural. It doesn't matter if you look at the materialist view of life, or if you look at the theology view of life. The theist and the deist and the agnostic and the atheist are all looking for something supernatural for the origin of us. So what is this attributes of the person or thing or object that is giving us this cosmological cause? So one, they have to be timeless and aspatial. So that means that they are outside of time. They're outside of space. Because we just talked about how that before that Big Bang, there was no time, there was no space. And even in our own vernacular, we say, at the end of time, God will take us to heaven. Well, have you ever thought about that phrase? Like, is it really no more time? Or is it that we have no perception of time? Is it that God lives outside of time and he's pulling us into his time? It's so beyond what we can even think about. And it makes me excited because at the same time, it's like, God is so much bigger than what I can even imagine. He's also so powerful. So because of this universe, if you think about it, the largest thing that we know of is the universe. But God is more powerful and he transcends all of that. He has the ability to be this all-powerful deity. And then he's also what we call causally sufficient. Now, what that means is that the universe had a beginning, therefore it had a cause. So this is a little bit of a different, but God didn't have a cause because he is eternal. He didn't have a beginning. So that the Kalam cosmological argument doesn't apply to God because he's beyond anything that we know. So he's timeless, he's aspatial, he's all-powerful, but yet he's also personal. How do we know he's personal? Because we're here. The God of the universe has finally tuned this universe for us. Which leads me to my next point, which is called the teleological argument for God. Now, what is this teleological argument? So this is really about what we call the natural world exhibits, and it's so specific and complex that it couldn't have happened by a random chance. It needed an intelligent designer. So really the universe's initial conditions of physical constants were derived. And then we looked at these fine-tuning arguments. So we're going to look at this for a second. And here's an analogy. So this was by William Paley. He was a famous analogy. He said, if you find a stone sitting outside, okay, maybe it's always been there. It's been sitting on there. You find a watch, and you say, oh, okay, it's got complex gears and springs. It has a purpose to tell time. Then you know it must have had a designer. And then Pele said, of the universe, just like the human eye, which is far more complex than a watch, this complexity implies that there's a grand designer. And the same thing, like just as we look at the universe, it's so perfectly designed, it's even more accurate than this time watch that I have here. Now, how accurate is it? This is one of my favorite things to talk about, is this thing called the cosmological constant. So remember I talked about how the universe is expanding, okay? So the universe is expanding at a perfect rate. Now, what do I mean by that? So if I said if you blew up a balloon, okay, if you blew it up too slowly, it doesn't fill up, right? Like if you have a little balloon, it kind of runs out and you don't get that final push on it, right? So the same thing could happen with the universe. If the universe was expanding too slowly, you'd have what's called this big crunch. It would actually start, the forces would actually cause the universe to come back together, and then they would hit each other and everything would collide back together. If it was expanding too quickly, so again, imagine that balloon, you blew real hard, what's going to happen? It's going to explode. So the same thing, as the balloon or your universe gets too big, it actually starts to get colder and colder and colder until there's actually this, what we call the big freeze or the big rip, where everything just separates. And there's no matter, no energy, no stars, no planets. Everything would have just floated away. So how perfect and finely tuned is this force, this cosmological constant? So it's 10 with 120 zeros. So kids, if you want to, the rest of this time I want you to write 1 and then 120 zeros. I want you to count them. Okay? Do that. It's your homework, all right, if you want to work on that. So this is a good example of how finely tuned this is. I'm going to pick somebody in the audience. We got Jamie, okay? I'm going to say, Jamie, I'm going to pick one atom in this universe. Oh, wait a second. There's only 10 with 82 atoms in the observable universe. So I'm going to pick one atom out of 1.5 universes. I'm going to pick an imaginary universe. And I want you to turn around because I'm going to pick an atom somewhere between here and the end of the universe. I'm going to close my eyes, and then I'm going to let you pick another atom out of 1.5 universes. Okay. Now, what are the chances that we're going to pick the same one? I couldn't even pick the same one in the tip of my finger. Like this is how perfectly designed this cosmological constant is. And that's just one aspect of how finely tuned our universe is. The same thing here happens with like gravity. So if gravity was too weak, at the beginning of our universe, then the planets and stars wouldn't have formed. Everything would have just drifted apart. If it was too strong, the stars would have burned up too quickly. Everything would just compress together and everything would have just gone poof, gone. So again, gravity we think about as just like it's holding us down on this planet, which is super helpful, by the way. But again, it's doing more than that. It's holding our planets together. It's holding our sun together. And just the perfect balance to allow our sun to continually burn at a perfect rate that keeps us warm for millions of years, if God wanted it to happen. So, again, and then we're talking about cosmology. Now I want to get really small, okay? So, if you remember from, science class that you have the atom, it's like the most basic component of particles. And so you have the electrons going around and then you have the nucleus, okay? So that's what we're going to talk about for a second. Is those protons and neutrons, okay, on the inside. So these are the nuclear forces, so there's a binding of that nucleus, okay? And if you think about this, people talk about how there's similarities amongst animals and how things are designed perfectly. If you actually looked at, what does this look like? It's like a planet with a bunch of moons around it. It's like there's this symmetry that happens, like even in the smallest particles to the largest of our planets and stars and solar systems are very similar design to all of these things. So this gravitational force, this nuclear force is 10,000 billion times stronger than gravity. So again, how can you have a force so strong and so small? But it's just right that this nucleus is perfectly designed. That it's holding all of our chemicals together. If it was too weak, then everything again would just float apart. If it was too strong, then everything again would be condensed and everything would be hydrogen, which would be really boring. Our universe would just be nothing. And I'm just going to pick a couple other ones and really just this. There's the electromagnetic gravitational ratio, there's proton electrical mass ratios, there's these initial entropy of the universe, which I'm not going to talk about each one of these, but it just keeps going on and on. But I did want to talk about this one because this is fascinating. So if I went back to this picture of the protons and the neutrons and the electrons. So the protons in here are, a positive charge, and then the electrons are negatively charged. But they're a perfect 1-to-1 ratio. However, protons are 1,836 times heavier than an electron. So again, it's like, how does this get perfectly designed that they're perfectly matched to the charge, but one is over almost 2,000 times larger in size than the other? It's like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, these are all perfectly designed. So how many different things are there? So if you had to set all these dials, so if I just said the cosmological constant was 1 part out of 1.5 universes, but then I put all these other things together and I said, okay, there's an electromagnetic force, there's the velocity of light, there's water that we drink, how the polarity works, all these different things. There's actually 360 different fine-tuned constants for us to exist. And that's talking on a large scale, like, I'm not talking about like evolution and how our bodies are here and how my liver works with my heart and my heart works with my lungs, and like, I'm not talking about any of those things. I'm just talking about like a physical existence of our planet for us to live on. There's 360 different fine-tuning. So how do we explain how perfect the universe is and how it's designed for life? There's 3 options. The fine-tuning of our universe can be explained by physical necessity, chance, or design. So what do I mean by physical necessity? It means that I need it to happen. Like, it has to be that way. So the laws could not be any different. However, this doesn't work. And this is why. Another analogy. So I need water to survive. Therefore, that means that water is my physical necessity. But it doesn't mean that water is going to be available for me. Does that make sense? So just because I need something to be true doesn't mean that it's going to be true. There's people that have died from thirst or hunger. Those are all physical necessities. But it doesn't mean that that necessity leads to what I actually need in my life. It doesn't give me what I need. So just because I need the physical reality to be the way, and those 360 things to be the way they are, it doesn't lead to that it designed itself. It couldn't do that. Okay, what about chance? There's a lot of people that say, okay, our world just happened by chance. All those 360 dials were perfectly set, but the odds against that are astronomically improbable. So it really kind of rules out chance. Because really, it doesn't know, like every single one of those is on a knife edge. If I changed a few of those even just by a few percentage points or even a partial percentage points, everything would just fall apart. So this is really why chance fails. Chance is a descriptive statistic. It's not a creative force. It describes probability, but it cannot explain origin. Chance doesn't cause the coin to flip. Your thumb does. So you can continually flip a coin. And if I said, okay, I want you to flip a coin 3,000 times in a row heads, how long are you going to sit there and do it? Okay, if I said, I want you to do it 1 billion times. Okay, if I said, all right, now we have those 360 different constants, I want you to flip the coin 360 trillion times. Are you ever going to get to the point where you can flip a coin that many times perfectly? So by saying the universe happened by chance, is it effectively saying that it happened by nothing? Because really, nothing can do that. There's nothing in the scientific world that has shown that there's these options of chance in return. Now, I do want to say something real quick about this, because there's this argument around what's called the multiverse. And this has actually been more popularized with like those comic movies like Marvel. And there's this idea of multiverse, that there's these millions and trillions and infinite versions of our universe. And then it says, well, if there's an infinite universe out there, then there can be a universe that's perfectly designed for humans to survive in. Okay, let's just go with that for a second. What evidence do we have of a multiverse? You want to know? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The only theory that we have for multiverse is a theory. Somebody said, I'm not happy with the idea that there's a designer of the universe. So I'd rather be more comfortable with an idea of a multiverse that would just be going on, chugging out trillions of options and chances of all these fine-tuned arguments than I would within a creator God. Which really leads to the third point of design. So fine-tuning is not due to physical necessity, it's not due to chance, it's due to a supernatural design. Design remains the most rational explanation after rejecting the alternatives. This entity is responsible for design that must be an agent that is supremely intelligent, like we talked about. It's all-powerful and transcendent. The qualities traditionally ascribed to God. Now, this is, again, I'm not saying the Christian God. We're going to explore the Christian God in later series. But I think that the Christian God explains this very well. And partly because I think in the biblical perspective, there's just kind of these two ideas. There's a general revelation of God's design that he revealed through his existence and power through the created world or nature, like we've been talking about all today. And then there's this special revelation. So God revealing himself through a specific character and plan of salvation through his words and scriptures and Jesus. So what support do we have in the Bible of what we've been talking about? There's Romans 1:20. It says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, his divine nature, has been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without an excuse." Now, I believe it was C.S. Lewis that talked about how people can see the evidence of God, like just what we presented today, where there's these fine-tuning arguments. There's this idea that the universe had a beginning and God was before that beginning, and he was eternally powerful. He has this divine nature outside of time and space because he's all-powerful, eternal, and personal. And he gives us no excuse. He says, you don't have to read my scriptures to know I'm real. You know how many people have been converted to believe in God just because of what they see around them? They look up at the stars and they see how small they are and say, there's got to be something more than me. But then also there's this perfect universe. So that teleological argument that I just talked about, those 360 dials, is that he established and fixed the laws of heaven and earth in Jeremiah 33:25. So again, he knows each one of those dials and he perfectly establishes them. And he has made everything beautiful in his time, and he has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from the beginning to the end. That goes back to what we talked about initially with that first quote from C.S. Lewis, that he said that, we are not satisfied with this world. It's because we're made for another world. The Bible in Ecclesiastes 3 says that. It says that he set eternity in our heart. We're constantly looking for something bigger than ourselves. And in Psalms 19:1-4, it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth. Their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens, God has pitched a tent for the sun." Again, it just shows the majesty of God, that we look into the skies and the universe for him. So to show just at the end here, does it matter? So again, Pascal's wager, I think that hopefully with what we presented and what you already believe, that God does exist. And if that's true, it's infinite gain or infinite loss. Those are our options. So what should we be doing in the future? Well, hopefully you'll come in the future for our other event. And we can talk more about, we're going to look at the Bible. This time was very looking at the general revelation, looking at what God has created from the universe standpoint. Those Kalam cosmological arguments, the teleological arguments. But also, I want to look more into, can we trust the Bible? Is the Christian God the God that created this universe? It's not the only argument out there. If it was, Christians would be the only ones. But there's other religions out there. So we're going to see, is the Bible trustworthy? Because a lot of people and a lot of religions say it's not. And then we'll go on to study some of these other things. If you want to study some of these on your own, there's some really good books. So The Case for Creator talks a lot about what I talked about today. It goes in much more depth and explanations to the arguments that we talked about. The same for I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Because again, like we talked about today, The atheist view says that everything that we have today is all that we have. But if you go back to their belief in the Big Bang, there's something before the Big Bang. And so you have to believe in something that's supernatural. Or you have to believe in the multiverse theory, which actually has no evidence behind it. But I think based on what we've talked about and then what we're going to talk about in the future, there is evidence. There is evidence for God. There's evidence for the biblical God. So, with that, I want to open it up for any questions that you may have. And I know that this is a lot of information. This is probably one of the more deep studies and more sciencey. So if this was not your cup of tea today, the next few will be less in-depth and more interesting for you that like history and less philosophy. Okay, so we're going to look at things like archaeology and writings and some of the things around that. So hopefully, I'm a more sciencey guy, so this was very fun for me. But I know it's not everybody, but the next time will be a little bit different. So Tuesday night will also be a little more, hopefully low-key, and we can ask some more kind of interactive questions potentially. So, but yeah, any thoughts or questions? Yeah, Linda.
Could you please explain the Pascal's wager in the sense of you've got these sentences here, but then trying to look up at the box and then try and put the word in the sentences? I was getting confused on which is supposed to be where, so I think I've got it wrong.
Okay. Yeah, so God doesn't exist. It means belief then is finite loss. Don't believe, then finite gain. God does exist, then infinite gain. Don't believe, then infinite loss. That's why I had to answer to you.
That was the one before that.
The one before that.
Or the three before that.
Okay. So there's common positions. So atheist, God does not exist. Agnostic is a person who claims neither faith nor disbelief. Every worldview carries consequences for how we understand meaning, morality, and destiny. Every worldview carries a degree of faith, as no one can know everything. Yeah. Very good.
And then, how about the one after the Big Bang? Big Bang space is time. The teleological.
Oh, before the Big Bang, space and time and matter did not exist. The universe had a cause. The cause must be timeless and all-powerful is the next one.
More powerful?
But more all-powerful. Yeah, so timeless, aspatial, all-powerful, and personal. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes?
Read all 520.
Oh, you wrote? Oh, wow. That's amazing. Great job. Sounds good. Any other questions or thoughts?
It says looking ahead, read blank chapter 1.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I think I put that in a different slide and then I took it out. So I would read, my thought was read Genesis 1. Yes, Genesis 1. It's a good place to start in the start of the Bible. And I think one thing I like about Genesis 1 is, Carter, do you remember Genesis 1 in the beginning? God created the heavens and the earth. So the heavens and the earth really, I think, speaks to like the universe. There was actually no word in Hebrew for universe because they didn't have an understanding of it, but it's like they created everything is another way to put it. But then as you read through Genesis 1, it talks about how the earth was without form and void when he created it. So again, it's like, what does that mean? We don't really know. But I think as we read through Genesis, it's really fun and fascinating. One thing I didn't talk about today was light. But as you read Genesis 1 on the first day, God created light. And what does that mean? Like, does that mean that there was no light before God created us? Or does it mean that he created the physical light being here on earth? Or did he move it here and say, oh, well, here's an empty part of the universe, I'm going to move all the light there so you can see all the other stars and planets? I don't know, but it's a lot of fun. And if you study light in itself, if you just ask your AI friends and say, hey, tell me more about light. Light is a particle and a wave. It has no mass, and there's all these things that just make no sense. Light is this, again, one of those perfect things that was designed by God. Christian, yeah.
So just on that, in the Hebrew for Genesis, the first two verses, this is a simplification, but the first two verses are past tense. And so the filling and forming are the 7 days. And so heaven, existing before the filling and things like that. And then on the light, as you dive into the Hebrew, the light is given its function on day 4. So it kind of exists there at the start, but then it's added its function. So it doesn't contradict itself, but it throws us off sometimes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that feeling. Yeah, his light was created on day 1, and then day 4 was the sun, moon, and stars. Linda.
So on nuclear forces, there were 3 things that you said that were important. You said the one was just right, the second was too weak, and what was the third one?
Too strong.
Too strong.
Yeah. So if it was too weak or too strong. Yeah, if the nuclear force was too strong, then it would cause things to condense, and the nuclear would squish it,
itself?
and then they would all kind of disintegrate in a different way. Yeah. And if it was too weak, then everything would just float apart. Yeah. Anything else? I'm thinking of time. Okay. Well, I hope we'll have another kind of Q&A at the beginning next week. We'll have some. If you have any questions, I think we have that black box over there somewhere that we can put some questions in. Maybe we'll get the little box out and you can drop some questions in there. Or you can ask me directly and I can fill them in and we can talk about them next week. If you have any specific questions, that you can email me or text me as well, and we can talk about them next week. So definitely want to give you guys opportunities to ask questions. I know this was a very deep topic, but even as we're getting ready next week to talk about the Bible, so if you have specific questions about the Bible, and you're saying, like, why does the Bible contradict itself here, or what is, the Dead Sea Scrolls about? We're going to talk about some of that in the conversation, but I do just want to open it up for any types of questions in relation to that.